the Golden State Killer after 40 years. Since then, it has solved over 300 impossible cold cases, cases that seemed hopeless, cases where the trail had gone completely cold. And in 2025, this same technology could finally reveal who killed JonBenét Ramsey. For 28 years, unknown male DNA has been both the biggest clue and the biggest mystery in this case. Today I'm going to explain exactly what this DNA evidence is, why it's been so controversial, and how new technology could finally provide the answers everyone has been searching for. But first, you need to understand what happened that Christmas night in 1996. The Ramsey family returned home from a Christmas party at 9:30 p.m. on December 25, 1996. JonBenét, a 6-year-old child beauty pageant competitor with blonde hair and a bright smile, was carried to bed asleep by her father John. It was the last time they would see their daughter alive. The next morning at 5:52 a.m., Patsy Ramsey found a ransom note on the stairs. The note was handwritten on paper from inside their home. It was unusually long, 2.5 pages. Most ransom notes are just a few sentences. This one was detailed, almost theatrical. The note demanded exactly $118,000. That amount was nearly identical to John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus. How would a kidnapper know that precise detail? Patsy called 911 despite the note's warning not to contact police. Boulder police arrived within 7 minutes. But what happened next would become one of the most catastrophic crime scene failures in American history. Officers searched the house but failed to open the wine cellar door in the basement where JonBenét's body lay. Friends and family filled the home, contaminating potential evidence. The scene that should have been immediately secured became a gathering place. 7 hours later, at 1 p.m., Detective Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey to search the house again. He went directly to the wine cellar in the basement. He opened the door. Inside, on a white blanket, was JonBenét. John screamed. He immediately picked up his daughter's body, pulled the duct tape off her mouth and carried her upstairs. In his panic and grief, he destroyed the crime scene. The autopsy revealed the horrific truth. JonBenét had suffered 2 catastrophic injuries, a massive blow to the head that fractured her skull. The force was equivalent to falling from a 2-story building. This injury would have rendered her unconscious almost immediately, but she didn't die instantly. Her brain showed swelling that takes time to develop. She survived for a period after the initial blow, though likely unconscious. Then, anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours later, someone applied a garrote cord fashioned with a wooden stick from Patsy Ramsey's paintbrush. The cord was twisted around JonBenét's neck, strangling her. This timing is crucial. It means whoever killed JonBenét had time to think, to act, to make decisions after the initial injury. This wasn't a single moment of violence. This was a sequence of events that unfolded over time. The compromised crime scene meant that almost every piece of evidence could be interpreted multiple ways. Fibers could have been transferred innocently or during the crime. The ransom note written on materials from the home could indicate an intruder who spent time there or someone already inside. For years, the investigation focused primarily on the family. There was no clear evidence of an intruder. The ransom note seemed staged. Behavioral observations of the parents raised suspicions. But then investigators found something that would eventually change everything. In 1997, forensic scientists analyzing evidence from the crime scene discovered DNA from an unknown male on JonBenét's underwear. Specifically, there was a mixture of DNA in the crotch area of the underwear, consisting primarily of JonBenét's DNA, but also including DNA from an unknown male. This DNA did not match anyone in the Ramsey family. It did not match any of the early suspects in the case. It did not match anyone in the FBI's CODIS database of known offenders. At first, investigators were cautious about this evidence. The underwear JonBenét was wearing when found was brand new, several sizes too large. Patsy Ramsey explained that she had purchased a package of underwear as a gift, but JonBenét had wanted some pairs for herself. Because the underwear was new and had come from a package, there was concern that the DNA could have been deposited during the manufacturing process. A factory worker, a quality control inspector, or anyone who handled the underwear before it was purchased could have left trace amounts of DNA. This is called touch DNA, and it can be transferred innocently in many ways. So the DNA evidence was noted but not considered definitive. Not yet. But in 2003, more sophisticated DNA testing was conducted. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation used newer technology to develop a more complete profile of the unknown male DNA. This profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. The search found no match. The unknown male DNA did not correspond to anyone in the database. Then in 2008, investigators took a crucial step. They tested JonBenét's long johns, the pants she wore over the underwear, using touch DNA technology, which can extract DNA from skin cells left on objects through contact. They found DNA on the waistband of the long johns. This DNA was consistent with the unknown male DNA found in the underwear. This finding was significant. If the DNA in the underwear could potentially be explained by innocent transfer during manufacturing, the presence of matching DNA on the long johns was much harder to explain away. The long johns were not new. They were JonBenét's own clothing that she had worn before. The probability that the same unknown male DNA would appear in both locations through innocent means seemed low. This suggested that whoever left this DNA had direct contact with JonBenét on the night she died. In May 2008, based on this DNA evidence, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacy sent a letter to John Ramsey formally exonerating the Ramsey family. Lacy wrote that the presence of the unknown male DNA in multiple locations, in circumstances that suggested it was deposited at the time of the crime rather than through innocent contact, indicated that an intruder had committed the murder. She apologized to the Ramsey family for the years of suspicion and public accusations they had endured. This exoneration was unprecedented and extremely controversial. Many investigators, including some who had worked the case for years, were stunned by the decision. They argued that the district attorney had overstepped. The DNA evidence alone was insufficient to completely exclude the Ramseys. Touch DNA could still have innocent explanations. Critics pointed out that touch DNA is easily transferred. A person can leave DNA on an object without ever being at a crime scene. If someone at the underwear factory or at the store or anyone who handled the long johns at any point touched those items, their DNA could have been transferred. Furthermore, if the DNA did come from the killer, why was there not more of it? In a violent crime involving manual strangulation with a garrote and significant physical contact, one would expect substantial amounts of the perpetrator's DNA to be present, particularly under the victim's fingernails if there had been any struggle. Yet the amount of DNA found was minimal. Trace amounts consistent with touch DNA rather than the more significant DNA deposit that would be expected from violent physical contact. The Boulder Police Department did not fully embrace the exoneration while they acknowledged the importance of the DNA evidence. They maintained that the investigation was continuing and that all theories remained under consideration. So for years, the DNA evidence created another layer of complexity and debate rather than solving the case. The question remained, whose DNA is this, and how did it get there? But in 2018, everything changed. Not for the JonBenét Ramsey case specifically, but for cold cases everywhere. Investigators in California used a revolutionary new technique to identify the Golden State Killer, a serial rapist and murderer who had terrorized California in the 1970s and 1980s. The killer had been unknown for over 40 years, despite extensive investigation and DNA evidence. The technique was called forensic genetic genealogy. Here's how it works. Investigators take DNA from a crime scene and upload it to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. These are the same databases that millions of people use to research their family history and find relatives. The crime scene DNA doesn't need to exactly match anyone in the database. Instead, the system looks for partial matches. People who share segments of DNA with the unknown person. These are typically distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who might not even know each other exist. Once investigators find these distant relatives, professional genealogists build family trees. They work backward and forward through generations, identifying all the descendants of common ancestors. Eventually, they narrow down to a small number of people who could potentially be the source of the crime scene DNA. Then traditional detective work takes over. Investigators look at where these potential suspects were living at the time of the crime, their ages, their backgrounds. They might conduct surveillance and collect DNA samples from discarded items like coffee cups or cigarette butts to confirm a match. This technique has been extraordinarily successful. Since the Golden State Killer case in 2018, forensic genetic genealogy has been used to solve over 300 cold cases, cases from the 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s that seemed permanently unsolved. The technique works even when the crime scene DNA is partial or degraded. It doesn't require a perfect sample. Even a limited DNA profile can identify distant relatives and build a family tree. And the DNA profile from the JonBenét Ramsey case is intact. It has been preserved. It is waiting. John Ramsey, now in his 80s, has become a vocal advocate for using this technology on his daughter's case. In interviews over the past few years, he has repeatedly called on the Boulder Police Department to send the evidence to private labs that specialize in forensic genetic genealogy. In a 2023 interview, John stated, "I want this case solved before I die. The technology exists. It's been proven to work on cases older than this one. There's no reason not to use it." He has pointed to the success stories. The Golden State Killer, the 1987 murder of a young couple in Washington state, solved in 2018. The 1974 killing of a 15-year-old girl in Pennsylvania, solved in 2022. Case after case where forensic genetic genealogy provided the breakthrough that decades of traditional investigation could not. In 2021, the Boulder Police Department announced that they were working with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and other partners to review the case using the latest forensic technology. They stated that they were committed to using every available tool to solve the case. In 2022 and again in 2024, the department reiterated this commitment. They indicated that they were actively working on DNA testing and analysis. though they declined to provide specific details about what evidence was being tested or what methods were being used. This secrecy is standard in ongoing investigations. Police don't want to tip off potential suspects or compromise the investigation by revealing too much publicly. But it's frustrating for those following the case and for John Ramsey, who wants to know that progress is actually being made. Reports in late 2024 suggested renewed activity in the investigation. Sources indicated that additional DNA testing was being conducted and that investigators were pursuing new leads. The Boulder police chief made a public statement reaffirming the department's commitment to solving the case. So the question becomes, can forensic genetic genealogy solve this case? The answer depends entirely on whether the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing actually came from her killer. If the DNA is from the killer, and if that person has relatives who have submitted their DNA to genealogy databases, then yes, the case could potentially be solved in the same way the Golden State Killer case was solved. Investigators would identify the family tree, narrow down potential suspects based on age and location in 1996, and then use traditional investigation techniques to determine which family member was in Boulder on Christmas night. However, if the DNA is not from the killer, if it was deposited through innocent transfer at some point before the crime, then forensic genetic genealogy will only identify an innocent person who happened to leave DNA on the underwear or long johns at a factory, store, or through some other innocent contact. This would be a dead end that could consume significant investigative resources and potentially lead to innocent people being scrutinized and their privacy invaded. This uncertainty is why some investigators remain cautious about placing too much faith in the DNA evidence. Touch DNA is powerful but also problematic. It can be transferred innocently in ways that are difficult to track or verify. There's also the question of whether the DNA profile is suitable for genetic genealogy. Some DNA profiles are more complete than others. The more complete the profile, the more likely it is to produce useful matches in genealogy databases. If the profile from the JonBenét case is partial or degraded, it might not produce actionable results, or it might produce too many distant matches to narrow down effectively. Despite these uncertainties, the possibility that forensic genetic genealogy could solve this case after 28 years has created renewed hope and interest. John Ramsey is watching closely. True crime followers around the world are waiting for news. The Boulder Police Department continues to work the case. They maintain an active tip line. They review evidence with new technologies as they become available. They have stated publicly that they will never give up, but the clock is ticking. John Ramsey is 81 years old. He has already lost his wife Patsy, who died in 2006, 2 years before the family was exonerated. He has lost his daughter. He has lived under suspicion for decades. He wants to know the truth before he dies. He wants his family's name cleared completely. He wants justice for JonBenét. If the DNA testing leads to a suspect identified through forensic genetic genealogy, we could have answers within months, a name, an arrest, a trial. Finally, after 28 years, justice. If the DNA leads nowhere, we're left with the other evidence. The ransom note, the staging, the grand jury indictment that was hidden for 14 years, the behavioral evidence, the fibers, all the circumstantial pieces that point in different directions depending on interpretation. 2025 could be the year of truth, the year when advanced technology finally answers the question that has haunted investigators, true crime followers, and the Ramsey family for nearly 3 decades. Or it could be another disappointment, another dead end in a case filled with them. But for the first time in 28 years, there is real, tangible hope, not just speculation. Not just theories, but actual scientific technology, with a proven track record of solving the unsolvable. The DNA is there, the technology exists. The question is whether Boulder police will use it, and whether it will lead to JonBenét's killer or to another innocent person caught up in this tragedy. Someone knows what happened to JonBenét Ramsey on Christmas night 1996. That person might be the killer still living free after all these years. That person might be a witness who saw something but never came forward. That person might be someone who heard a confession or noticed something suspicious but didn't realize its significance. That person could still come forward. Tips can be submitted to the Boulder Police Department at any time. Even after 28 years, even a small piece of information could be the catalyst that finally solves this case. John Ramsey deserves answers. JonBenét deserves justice. And the truth deserves to be told. If you want to follow this case and see updates when DNA results are announced, subscribe to this channel, comment below with your thoughts. Do you think that DNA will finally solve this case, or is it another false hope? Thank you for watching this investigation. JonBenét Ramsey was a 6-year-old child with a bright future ahead of her. That future was stolen. But the search for truth continues. The pursuit of justice continues. And in 2025, we may finally get the answers we've been waiting for.